how do you allocate the cost of your business down to when I sell that bolt, what are my costs? So, I mean, we can get into what does it cost to pick it and in the warehouse, pack it. Does it ride with other items? You know, if you have a 10,000 pound order and you add a bolt to it, there's zero marginal shipping cost. And so what kind of orders does it tend to ship with? You can get really deep here, but I think it's important to do so because if you don't, you may be feeling great about your X% gross profit margin you're making on an item, but if we look at what the true net is, it's negative or below your target. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Bartel, the CEO of Hydrian Inventory Optimization. I'm here with Drew Roth, who's our Director of Product Engineering. And today we're going to talk about a concept that we call going on a SKU diet. And what we're really talking about there is how does a distributor or wholesaler decide which items to carry? Should they be stocked? Should they be drop shipped? Should they be offered to customers at all? What goes into that decision? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each of those choices? And how can you, as a leadership member of a wholesaler distributor, make better decisions in this area to increase overall profitability? So, Drew, obviously, the simple choice, if you have a big warehouse, is to fill it with stuff and stock the item. So, what are some reasons why you would want to do that, and maybe some reasons why it's not the best choice?
The biggest pro is you're going to ship faster to your customers. So, things that you want to stock are going to be your bread and butter items. They sell often. Probably have a smaller DC footprint. They're not extraordinarily large. They don't incur huge holding and processing costs in your warehouse. You also want to consider how quickly you can ship to your customers. So anything that you want that really minimal delivery time, you're probably going to want to stock that type of item.
Let's say that you don't want to stock an item. And so then you have several choices. The first one I wanted to talk about is ordering just in time, or as needed would be another way that it's sometimes talked about. So that's where, you're buying something from your supplier only when your customer buys it from you. What are some pros and cons of that approach?
Yeah, so generally the goal here is to not accrue these types of items on your shelf. So the pros are going to be just that. If it's working optimally, you don't actually hold any stock of this item, but you can still offer it in your catalog. Maybe it's a strategic move. The other pro is going to be you're negating some of the risk associated with stocking this type of item. More often than not, these types of items are low volume. They have sporadic sales. You don't quite know what to expect out of demand. If you made that stocking decision, one purchase might result in 1 to indefinite years of excess stock. So the pros are avoiding those types of situations. The cons, however, are first and foremost, you can't do this with every item. Import items, given the long lead times, a lot of times customers won't accept that. They're not going to purchase an item that's going to take 6 weeks to arrive. Effectively, in this scenario, your DC is operating as a cross dock, and just the shipping and handling costs are going to be a lot higher on a per item basis than they would be if you're stocking this item. So that's a detriment as well. Some of the other detriments would be you're always going to risk cancellation if you don't have a no return, no cancellation policy. So you very well might end up in the case where this item's been ordered by a customer, you purchase it, arrives at your facility, customers decided it's taking too long, they cancel it. Now you're stocking a non-stock item, and that's a really tough position to be in.
Yeah, I guess with a traditional item, if a customer order gets canceled as it's en route from the supplier, you just put it to your inventory. You have a nice shelf waiting for it.
And you can usually bank on the next customer ordering that. But with an item that you're just in time or back order only, you don't know when that next order is going to come.
Yeah, and I guess there's some overhead costs too, because you have to now set up, if you want to keep the item, a bin location in your warehouse, or you have to incur the return cost to the vendor. So there's lots of bad outcomes that are potentially going to happen. Assuming that we're not going to stock the item, we can't or have decided not to order as needed or just in time the item. Drop shipping is definitely an option sometimes.
Right.
So, drop shipping, obviously, you're making it someone else's problem, right? So the vendor is going to ship directly from their facility, often a manufacturing facility, to your end user on your behalf. Pretty clearly, that's going to avoid you having to hold inventory. Seems like there's some upside there. What are the risks?
First and foremost, it's just going to cost you more. Like you said, you're pushing the problem off on somebody else and you're going to pay for that. So either that's going to come in the form of an increased unit cost on a per unit basis, or they're going to slap a surcharge on every order. So that's probably the biggest consideration in terms of bottom line.
And I'm guessing too, talking about cost, even if they don't charge an extra fee, and this is almost like a courtesy they provide, you still do have this separate shipment that's being created, if it's a multi-line order. So now instead of everything going out in one nice box and, you shipping 10 pounds on a single shipment, you're now shipping those 10 pounds of product, your vendor's covering maybe 2 pounds of that product, you're covering the other 8, there's 2 shipments. That's going to be dramatically higher shipping cost, even if they're shipping on your account and there's no surcharge. So certainly in an environment like you're talking about where there's an added fee, but even if there's not, you're looking at higher costs.
Yeah.
So that's one bummer for sure.
In that case, it's a really tough thing to quantify, but it's a decreased satisfaction on the customer's part if they receive 2 shipments as opposed to 1.
On different days.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Great point.
The other thing to consider is presentation of the actual product itself. You have no control over the way that your vendor is going to package and ship that product. So it could be drastically different than the way that you would out of your facility. It might not meet the standards that you hold your own business to. So that's always a risk that's, again, difficult to quantify, but it's definitely has an impact on customer satisfaction.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so let's say that we've gone through this analysis on a given item. We considered stocking it, no good. Maybe it's an import item with a really long lead time, so just in time is not really applicable.
Sure.
Drop shipping, usually not a good item, good solution for the same reasons. So then the last thing we can decide to do if we don't want to stock it is not sell it altogether. Obviously reducing the size of your catalog is never a good thing. And I guess, as I think about helping clients make the decision not to sell something, that can sometimes be almost like an emotional sort of decision, right? Because they're saying, okay, well, part of the way many of our clients have staked their name, made their brand based on being able to offer a wide selection of products, and we're constraining that selection. But I think it's not. I think it's not quite that cut and dry, because there are lots of situations where you might actually improve your customer experience, right? So if you have lots of equivalent items that can fulfill the same function, customers might not value having 20 different finishes to choose from. And your sales volume probably is going to tell a lot of this story. And you might think, well, I'm sure they like seeing that there's 30 different colors of, bolt to choose from. But the people who are buying these bolts might have zero aesthetic concern. And constraining that somewhat is going to make product navigation a lot simpler.
Yeah.
In addition to the obvious savings in your warehouse, all the risks that we've talked about, whether you're deciding to stock it or drop ship it or whatever, all that kind of goes away if you don't sell the item at all, and in some way simplifies things.
Yeah, it's very much a housekeeping exercise. Like you said, it can be very emotional, but as an e-com consumer, from that standpoint, I personally don't want that many options. I don't need to scroll through, like you said, 4 pages of bolt. I would like 1 option, 2 options, 3 options that are going to fit the bill for me. I'm not interested in, it's really like paralysis by analysis, excuse me. How do I select between all these different options when ultimately you as a business can kind of make that decision for a given customer?
Yeah. I think, when we counsel clients, this might be a nice segue into, okay, if I'm looking at a given item, what are the characteristics or constraints that I'm thinking about when I'm considering which of these choices to make? Everything from, I'm going to stock this product really strongly, shoot for a high fill rate, take on lots of inventory, devote lots of dollars and space to it, all the way down to, I'm not going to sell this thing anymore. And so I think, there's first of all, there are no one size fits all solutions here. Every client is different. Their priorities are different. Their cash and space availability is different. And so I think that we need to focus on what the principles of those decisions are. So one thing for me is, what options are actually available to you? We've talked several times about how for import products, your choices are really stock the product or don't sell it, because anything in between could be, a 6-month lead time. You can't just in time it. You can't drop ship it. So what options are actually available to you is one nice way to constrain your choices. Profitability, I think, has to be a consideration here. And I think it's really important to understand that an item's profitability isn't just its gross profit margin. What does it cost to get this item into your warehouse? What does it cost to store it? And what does it cost to get it to the customer? And then on a longer time horizon, what is it costing you to throw it away when it doesn't sell? Because every item has some risk, particularly lower volume items, but every item has some risk that tomorrow people will stop buying it and you're going to be stuck holding the bag. So what is that risk and what's that cost? And that should obviously be a big influence. I think that minimum order quantities can be important. So at the item level, if we have to buy 100 of something at a time and our customers buy it 5 at a time, well then when we want to stock it, we're not just committing to stock enough for one customer order or a typical month of demand or whatever our stocking strategy is. we're potentially having to commit to a big inventory level. And if the item doesn't take off and start selling well, we're going to look back and wish we hadn't done that.
And we've seen MOQs that are 24, 36-month
Yeah.
equivalent demand. So that is a very tough situation to be in when you can't negotiate with your vendor something more reasonable compared to your sales.
And speaking of vendors, if you are thinking about doing drop shipping, vendor performance is really important. So obviously the fees and any sort of additional hard costs that they charge for drop shipping, that's a consideration. But the softer things like, can they deliver as fast as you can? Does the product look as nice? Does it arrive undamaged?
What does your website display when you drop ship something? That's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, because depending on where the customer is, the lead time could be very different from your normal lead time. And do you call that item in stock, ready to ship? And do you have access to the vendor's inventory to confirm that's actually true and it is going to ship quickly? So those are considerations also.
Yeah.
I think that question of how do you allocate the cost of your business down to, when I sell that bolt, what are my costs? So, I mean, we can get into what does it cost to pick it and in the warehouse, pack it. Does it ride with other items? If you have a 10,000 pound order and you add a bolt to it, there's zero marginal shipping cost. And so what kind of orders does it tend to ship with? You can get really deep here, but I think it's important to do so, because if you don't, you may be feeling great about your X% gross profit margin you're making on an item, but if we look at what the true net is, it's negative or below your target. So you mentioned client example. I think on the larger picture, when we go through this process with a client in a really rigorous way, which we've done several times, and kind of attack the whole inventory at once and try and answer this question, should I stock it, drop ship it, just in time it, or not sell it at all for the whole catalog, we've seen some pretty impressive results with clients. And you were directly involved with one of them.
Yeah. We had a case where the client's strategy, and it still is, was to stock or at least have in their catalog a really broad array of products. They wanted to check all the boxes. They wanted to satisfy all their customers. But when we looked at it, many of their products hadn't sold in many years. A lot of the products weren't meeting their margin requirements. And they started implementing some of our recommendations that we, of course, aligned with them on. And they've about halved their catalog. And over the course of the last year, their revenue has grown, and their profitability overall has grown as well by cutting out a large number of SKUs that either weren't selling at all or were producing negative margin, very low margin, things that weren't on goal with what they were shooting for. So it was an emotional process. It was difficult to get the ball rolling, but I think that they've seen a lot of the benefits now that they've been removed from it for a little bit. And just recently they talked about, hey, can we refresh this analysis? We're kind of ready to dig back in. Exactly.
Cut till you get to bone, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so I think this was something like a 40% reduction in the SKUs offered in their catalog, the number of items that they sold. And they were thinking in terms, before we started this process, of, we're willing to accept a significant sales hit to reduce this SKU complexity, the number of items that we stock and sell, because our overhead costs are just getting ridiculous. The customer experience navigating our website is kind of ridiculous. They did this 40% reduction and sales grew. And they did realize as well a significant inventory savings. So it was really a win-win for them. I don't know how many times we can rinse and repeat that cycle, but we'll go through it with them. And just like we did in the past, we'll sort of analyze each item and talk about the strategy with the client and hopefully get to a good result.
Yeah, it's funny when you align on the thresholds that need to be met with the client for any given item to maintain its place in the catalog, and you run the numbers and you present that to them, and reactions are very different than the hard thresholds that were defined up front. Yeah. So that's always something that we contend with, that we understand. There's a lot of strategic decisions that go into these. It's not just margin. It's not just warehouse capacity. But I think where we can offer our expertise is an unbiased third-party opinion that's just advocating for healthy inventory.
Yep. Based on a quantitative total cost to kind of manage each product, or hopefully total profitability to manage each product. Cool. Well, I think this is a really good topic. Obviously, we could talk a long time about it, but I think we've kind of hit the highlights around what options are out there and how should you be considering each of them. We're going to continue to have little talks like this where we dive into a given topic and hopefully provide some insight. We've started to get a really nice response, and people are asking us questions and asking us for additional topics to address, which we're going to do in coming weeks. So please stay tuned.